use that chat window if you've got questions during the parts where I'm just talking, and so that we can talk about questions and issues you're having at the end. So this is kind of how I feel about strategic planning, especially when you are a small organization. There's never a straight line. You never know exactly where you're going, and this is particularly true for new organizations, and especially folks who are not new to an organization, but new to how nonprofits work in general. There are a lot of nuances in how to do this. Nonprofits, of course, can be little tiny startup organizations all the way up to sort of United Way level giant orgs that got teams of people to work on this. I'm particularly interested in helping organizations like the ones you're working with figure out how to do this and how to make an impact in their community. And so the first webinar we're going to do, and this is a part of a series we do. There's actually, I think there's 8 of them, and we'll do one every week. We'd love to have you all come back or cherry pick the ones that you think are interesting to you. And we'll go through sort of as many topics as we can come up with that really have that sort of full spectrum of what goes into creating and building a successful nonprofit. A little bit about my background. I created my first nonprofit about 10 years ago. I was working on the East Coast doing some like warehouse art takeover sort of things, and we were getting a lot of great press and getting a lot of people to be interested in the work we were doing. And I couldn't get any funding from the County Arts Council because we weren't the term I always use is we weren't like a real nonprofit. We didn't have audited financials. We didn't have staff. And that sort of, made me mad. So then I started my own arts council, and we funded small and kind of creative focused projects. And we funded maybe 200 of these projects over a couple of years. Coming out to San Diego, which is where I am now, it started to become more interested in sort of the operational back end to help other people do what I had been able to do with my organization. So I created Tiny Opera House, again, to focus on helping small and startup nonprofits get off the ground and get started with a solid foundation to help them grow and be successful in their communities. A little bit of my sort of passion for this, and this is my soapbox about small nonprofits, is that there's a lot of sort of change that needs to happen in the nonprofit sector on a big level. I've seen and hear continually great stories of little organizations and small groups of people that know how to do a specific solution to a problem or understand something unique about their community that makes them more suited to do this type of work than a large community foundation or a large nonprofit. So and there's a ton of organizations just like yours. There's almost 15,000 brand new nonprofits every quarter in the U.S. that get created by some group of people with a similar kind of motivation to yours and to mine. When I created my nonprofit, I sometimes call it the screw you, I'll do it myself moment, when you think maybe I can be the person to do this change, and it's something I'm passionate about. So I'm going to step up. I'm going to file some paperwork and then figure out how to do this. So I think the work that you're doing is I'm sure is really important and really high impact in your community. And I'm really interested in helping provide some information to kind of shorten that learning curve. This is sort of what everyone does. You want to save the whales, and then you create an organization and file the paperwork, and then you end up on the other side sort of not knowing what to do next, because it can be complicated, and you've got to kind of be the one to motivate yourself. If you're working by your just with one person or with a small team. So there's things that I've learned in doing this, for a little bit over a decade and working with hundreds of small organizations across the country like we do now, that, are designed to make it easier for you to start up and start strong in this industry. We want to start off by talking about the basics of what you need to be a nonprofit organization. And these are things that everyone here is going to have either all or some of, but just to sort of set the framework for what we're talking about. These are the minimum requirements that you need to operate as a nonprofit in the United States. First is the legal entity with nonprofit status. You also need an employer identification number. Even if you don't have employees, this sort of becomes your registration number that shows up all over the place. There's also a number of local registrations, and these vary by state. They vary by county. Sometimes it's business licenses. Almost always in the state level, you've got to register to be able to solicit money from other people. There's a different requirement on top of the federal nonprofit status that you've got to file for. So there's a couple of those, and we'll talk about kind of different categories that those can fall into. And then for me, the bank account is, every time I've started an organization, I think I've done 5 at this point. Getting that bank account is sort of where I, feel like it's starting to be something that, really exists. You see your name on the checkbook, and that's how you can operate and have funds that, live somewhere else and can be specific to the organization. So that's kind of I consider that a tier 1 basic thing. And sometimes you need insurance, and depending on what you do, we'll talk a little bit about this. I've sort of flirted with the idea of hosting a whole webinar about sort of different insurances. That can be something if you've got specific questions about, I'm happy to answer those. So first, this, registration with the state. Of course, the states are who govern business registrations. And then the IRS, which is a federal agency, is who actually grants you the nonprofit status. So those are two different filings that have to be completed to get started. The employer identification number. This is something that you can get online now, which is great because it's the future. This becomes, like I said, it's your general sort of identification number. Even if you don't have any employees, this is, sort of like your social security number for the organization. Local registrations, these are a couple different types of registrations that can come up. You're all working in different localities across the country, so they're going to be different based on where you are. But the states and the counties and even the cities sometimes can have specific filing things that you need to do before you're really able to get up and running. Usually there's a separate form for tax exemption from sales tax, and that's a state thing. The solicitation requirements in California, you have to file with the Attorney General to say, hey, I'm here, I'm going to be asking people for money. And that's a separate thing. It's on top of doing the nonprofit filings. You've got to register with certain agencies. Sometimes business licenses will come up depending on, again, where you are. And if you're happen to be working in more than one state, you need to file these sort of local registration forms in every state you're working with, particularly the solicitation requirements. Again, if you've got specific questions about these, I'm happy to answer them or help you do some research to figure out what's important for you to take care of. Bank account. Again, for me, this is sort of when I start to feel like I'm really ready to start working. I generally recommend just going with a sort of large corporate institution. A lot of these have free options for nonprofit organizations. There's sort of two thinkings of this, and we'll talk some more about this in financial management, but I think the choices are either going with a Wells Fargo or a Chase, something like that, because they're going to have good online access. And again, a lot of times they have free checking for nonprofits. Big banks also have their own sort of political background issues, and there are folks who sort of would rather go with someone local. It can also be a great idea to have a bank account with a sort of local community bank in where you're working. This can be good for sort of relationship building. Community banks will sometimes have grant funds available for members, but usually you have to pay more money, more in fees to be part of a smaller bank. So two things to consider there. Sometimes insurance, and again, this depends on what you're doing and what your board wants you to do. There are specific insurances that help protect board members from liability for what the organization is doing. There's also sort of general and professional liability. This is kind of like if you're operating, physical location and someone gets hurt, to have some sort of general liability. Professional liability is more of, if you tell someone you're going to help them do, a student loan application and you end up being, something goes wrong and the application doesn't go through or something like that. That's more professional liability. Those are the big ones. General liability is sort of kind of slip and fall type of things. Professional liability, more of, doing the job that you say you're going to do if you don't end up doing it that well. And that directors and officers is that the name of the insurance that can protect board members from liability for the organization. There are some board members who won't serve on nonprofit boards if they don't have directors and officers insurance. It's usually kind of, wait until someone asks for it before you get that one. That's sort of the big buckets of what the insurance landscape looks like, when you're just kind of getting your feet on the ground. And again, I'm happy to answer sort of specific situational questions about that. Okay, so Tier 1 is sort of the minimum requirements, and I try to talk real fast during that because it's all of the kind of paperworky, boring things that have to happen. As you have all learned at this point, the journey to doing some mission work that is sort of bigger than yourself. There's a lot of paperwork and checking boxes that goes into it. And that's sort of, the learning curve that you go through. But once you've got all those things taken care of, then you can start to work on what I always refer to as how to look like you're a real nonprofit. And this is, not to be insulting for organizations who are new, but when you are brand new, you've got no track record, you've got no credibility. There's, no real reason that anyone should believe that you are actually going to take the money and spend it on the community and not just take it and, go to, Hawaii with it. Luckily, it's not an infinite universe of how to look like you're a real organization. I think a lot of this you can use your own experience with. If you get an unsolicited email, you might have gotten an unsolicited email from Tiny Opera House. We get information from different sources and, are trying to help people who are just getting started. So what do you do when you're confronted with a new organization and you want to sort of check them out to see if they're, a real thing? The biggest one for me is the website. Can you find them online? Does it look like it's something that someone is taking care of and trying to be professional about? A separate phone number, I think, is really important. And there's some easy, cheap, free solutions to getting a separate phone number. Office location is, depending on what you're doing, can be important. Luckily, there's lots of great options in terms of co-working and sort of cohabitating with other organizations that we'll talk some about. And I think having a logo and a business card is, really kind of the defining factor. If you can hand someone a business card when you meet them and it's got your name and it's got some sort of representation of what you're doing, it's a little old school, but I think that, for me, that is definitely in this bucket of how to look like you're a real organization. Website, we actually do a whole webinar on this. It's going to be February 22nd. That we'll talk for a whole hour just about websites. I think when you're small, websites are something you should do yourself. I think that everyone's got a brother's cousin's nephew who's a computer whiz who can do it for you, but those folks are, not going to be there when you need them to. They go into other projects and don't spend the time with it. And these days with all-in-one packages like Squarespace, it's really easy to do a website that looks great. I mean, the Tiny Opera House website stuff is just, I do it and I had to learn how that works. It's a learning curve worth investing in because then you can have control over keeping the content up to date, making sure you've got, recent event photos and things like that. That vibrancy element of the website, really needs kind of you've got to have control over it to make that work. Phone number, I always like to have a separate phone number for the business. I also don't like to pay for it because it's usually you're not really in an office yet. You're just working off your cell phone. I personally use Google Voice, even the Tiny Opera House phone number. If any of you have tried to call us or to set up an appointment, or when we do kind of office hours things, is a Google number. So it's a number that I got to pick the area code of. It is free, and it just routes right to my cell phone. So if you call the office number, I can see that it's coming through as an office call on my personal cell phone. It's a great solution, until you get to the point where you need more infrastructure for that, and that can be years until you get a physical office space that needs like a real phone plan. I don't think anyone uses fax anymore. Does anyone use fax? I don't think it's necessary. I don't even know how you would get a fax number at this point. Maybe you can fax a Google number. I guess I should look into that. Okay, office location. This is sometimes people, feel like having a, physical office space is part of creating a new organization. Like you're not a, real thing until you've got an office place. And I think that there's some, you should consider really carefully kind of if you really need to have an office. Most of the time you need an office if people are going to walk in that you don't have scheduled appointments with. That could be a reason why you have an office. Other than that, working kind of like coffee shops or doing a co-working space can be a really good option. It's a lot cheaper. I think in the beginning, you don't want to spend money on rent until you have to. Rent is not a super high impact expense in the beginning of an organization. There are also some co-working places offer a mailing address only solution, or I think places like mailboxes, etc. You can of course get a post office box, but then it doesn't, then it looks like you've got a post office box. There are some ways you can get just a physical mailing address that has a separate street number and is different from where you are kind of working on it either at home or wherever else. So if you need to have a separate mailing address, that's something you can look into. As far as the logo and business card, one of our webinars will talk more about this and how you can kind of do this on your own. That's February 8th if you want to come back and talk about branding. I also just recently put together like a PDF branding guide that talks a lot about DIY branding for organizations who are just getting started. There's some free tools you can use to create something that is like a logo. There are logo generators. And also ways to help you pick a color palette. If you've got specific questions on this, I'm happy to talk about this. I love what you can accomplish nowadays with branding and how you can make, again, go down that road of looking like a real organization. You see my logo in the bottom. I did this because I don't know how to really do it that well. And so it's just text because that's as, as good as I can really figure out. I paid someone to do that little tiny opera house in there, but there's lots of ways and lots of tools that again, this can be something you can do on your own and save that money that you would pay a branding person and spend it on, getting the mission part of the org right. Okay, any questions on these sort of basics? Like, I'm trying to set the groundwork for, now that we have all of these things in place, then we can really set to the work of figuring out how to execute on the mission and on the goals that we have in terms of what we want to do in the community. Are there any questions about all this sort of, checkboxy stuff? Okay, if you think of anything, again, just throw it in the chat window and we can talk about it later. Sarah, do you have a question? Depending on the contact that you have with the folks who are in need of service, I think that you've got some general liability issues there. There are literally hundreds of different small subgroups of general liability insurance. I work with a small arts organization that has kids that come through, and there's a policy for child kidnapping that is a specific sub policy. I think if you've got friends who are in the nonprofit industry, see if they can refer you to an insurance agent to talk to. And they'll be able to, you can sort of say, here's all the things we do, where do we have risk? I think when you're small, it's always balancing, balancing paying to mitigate risk and also understanding that, like what's the worst that could happen in an organization like that. It does sound like there are degrees of worse things that can happen if you're working with a sensitive population. For most organizations, I don't think it's that appropriate. In yours, I would find someone to talk to, and they've got brokers locally that can give you some good advice. Anything else before we start to talk about strategy and getting started there? Okay. So strategic planning, I think, is a really trendy term in nonprofits. There are also lots of strategic planning consultants that will help you kind of do this work, and they cost money. I think that there's different levels to think about when you're just getting started, and some of that is based on the fact that realistically you don't really know what you're doing yet. Right. So like when you're just starting out, it's hard to have a strategic plan when you don't know what's working, which, events or which community outreaches, which audience populations that we work with, which programs are working yet. It's hard to come up with a sort of larger plan about the future while you're still figuring out, how to execute on your mission. A strategic plan in general, and this is why I say, like, do I really need a strategic plan now? This is like kind of old school thinking, like having a business plan where you're going to spend all your time putting together a 40-page document of projections, and a strategic plan is very similar to that. What are we going to be in year 3? What are we going to be in year 5? How are we going to get from where we are now to where we really want to go? I think for most organizations who are just getting started, you don't really know where you want to be in 5 years, or if you're even going to be around in 3 years. I mean, you may find that you can have a huge impact in year 1, and then your team sort of falls apart, and then you move on to something else. I think there's space for all of these options in the small and startup org space. So I'm going to talk about not as much in the kind of traditional strategic planning, but sort of, how to use kind of a strategic mindset to further the organization and kind of help guide you as you're figuring this stuff out. The benefits of having a focus, strategic thinking are, it makes it easier for you to communicate who you are, what you're doing, why you need money, why you need to be in the paper. Things that are focused are easier for folks to understand, and that can go a long way in building donor relationships, building volunteer relationships. It's easier to align with partnership organizations when you're really sort of drilled down specific about what you're doing. It also helps avoid, this is a nonprofit-y term, mission drift. This is where you start off doing the pet rescue, and then you find, oh, there's other, there's farm animals that need help too. And so now I'm going to go over here and help farm animals. I know now that I'm on a farm, maybe we need to do something with, produce. And now we're doing a produce thing. If you're not focused about really, what impact you want to have and who you want to have benefit from that impact, you can sometimes kind of get off track. There's a little bit of getting off track that can be good because you need to be nimble and kind of follow what's working. Being focused also, and this is for me personally as someone who has to sort of manage my own time well, it helps you understand what you should be doing next. And that, I think, sometimes you can go down a kind of black hole of, I'm trying to save, the children and alleviate poverty, but what does that mean I need to do on Thursday at 1:30 in the afternoon? Focus can really help with that and help you, plan with your time. When you're small, there are some advantages to doing this. You can be very nimble in what types of programs you're doing, what types of events you're doing. You could probably take the afternoon today and plan an event that's coming in 4 weeks. That is something that you can kind of put all the pieces together, put it on the website, put it on Facebook, You can move really fast as a small organization. You've also got some advantages in terms of I call it the impact return per dollar. So, someone who gives you $1 is going to have more of a direct impact on a particular population than a United Way or a Red Cross. And I always seem to bash on the United Way. I think they're fine, but they've got pensions that they're paying for people who worked there 40 years ago, and every 10 years somebody defrauds them for millions of dollars like that. And it's just sort of a natural evolution of business. Like, as you get big, your value per dollar goes down versus organizations with a small team. Almost everyone who we work with doesn't have payroll yet. They're not getting paid. They just love what they're doing and they're spending their time doing it. And I think that's a very compelling message and a very compelling selling point. And so that's something that as you wrap that into kind of where you want to be strategy wise, can help kind of opening doors for you. So a strategic plan is typically it's like a formal document. It's like, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about what to do. We're going to interview all of our stakeholders and volunteers and see what they think about our organization. I think it's sort of overkill for most orgs when they're small or getting started. The approach I really like to take is more on the mission side, is looking at how can we refine our mission statement and our mission strategy to sort of serve as our guide for what we should be doing, how we should be engaging, how we expect to have the impact that we want. A mission is easy said as it's what you do. It's what you do as an organization. What sort of impact are you looking to have? Strategic plan is how you're going to do that over time. Again, I think a great and focused mission statement can sort of serve as its own mini strategic plan. And we'll talk a little bit, some examples of that. People love to do mission statements as organizations like this, like, provide a quality education for all kids. Like, that's great. I think that's a great mission. I have no idea how to execute on that next week, right? So sometimes in the effort to sound really kind of lofty and grandiose, there's, just like how when we get into doing grants and fundraising, which we talk about in a couple of weeks, there's sort of a grandiose nonprofit speak language where you are, very, effusive about the work you're doing. But from a strategic standpoint, it's really challenging, right? Because I don't know what to do. There are a lot of kids. Like, I don't know which kids I'm working on. Are they here? Are they, in another state? Are they other country? So how do you migrate from something like that to something like this? So what if our mission is instead to provide science and literature after school education to 3rd and 4th grade students in the Columbus, Ohio school district? This sort of thing, like when you nail and tease out really specifically what you're trying to do in your mission, this starts to sound more like a strategy and makes it, again, in that communication, it makes it easier for people to understand what you do. It makes it easier for them to sort of be able to insert themselves in the work that you're doing. And that's something that as you get into fundraising and program development, you really want people to sort of see themselves in the work that you're doing, and gives you a guide to, what you should be doing, next and what you're going to be doing in a month. So that's why this is sort of an example of how that specific targeted mission statement can serve some really important strategic value as you're going along. I'm going to talk about 3 approaches, and they're varying levels of like seriousness, maybe not seriousness. They're varying levels of formality, I guess, in strategic planning. I'm going to make this presentation is available. I think it may be even online now. I'll send out a link to everyone where you can download it, because there are some sort of worksheet things in here that can be helpful. But starting with the sort of leanest idea of strategy is a concept called the innovation cycle. So innovation cycle is technology companies use this a lot. It has the word innovation. I think they like that. It's kind of what I alluded to earlier. It's this idea of you're not really sure what works yet, And the way that you figure out what works is you do something, is you try something. You see if it worked, you see which parts of it worked, which parts of it didn't work, and then you adapt and you adjust as necessary. So after you try something, it worked pretty well. Maybe I'm going to try doing it slightly different next time, and then you try that in the same sort of process. That's why it's a cycle process of kind of experimentation, evaluation, and then adaptation to. I'm going to write that down. That sounded good, didn't it? Evaluation. Great. Something that's really important in this is to achieve this sort of see if it works piece. There's a lot of documentation that can be helpful for this. I know in my early organizations, we weren't documenting anything. We were just sort of doing things that we thought would be funny and interesting for the creative community, the arts community to come be part of. I didn't take any pictures. I didn't record any video. I didn't record attendance lists. And so then, a year later, when I wanted to do some of those things again, there's a lot of information and a lot of content that I didn't have that would really have been helpful. And as we, when we talk about branding and marketing and the importance of content in this world, it's a huge way to communicate what you're doing, what the value you're having, who you're having it on. So really, like I can't understate this much. As many things as you can document as you're trying. Take notes, take photos, take interviews, as much information as you can gather, because that's going to help you figure out, how do I do this better next time? Because you always want to do something better next time. And it's odds of you landing on a terrific program that hits on all of the marks the first time is really low. So you're going to need to adapt, and you're going to need information to be able to make those adjustments to do better in the future. Even if you don't know what you're going to do with it yet. What am I going to do with phone numbers for people who, came to an event? Like, I'm not going to call them probably, but, a year down the road, you might do a text message fundraising campaign and then think, oh God, I wish I had those phone numbers for all those people in the beginning. They can be, photos and videos. It's certainly really easy these days, with phones and everything. Testimonies from people, interviews, financial information. I've got a numbers background, and the Tiny Opera House platform does a lot of this financial management for small organizations. So that's of course, of interest to me. Website traffic, social media. There's all kinds of stuff to measure. But I think as much information as you collect is the more the better. So that, again, as you're adapting to do something better next time, that you can understand, how to work that better. Yeah, I think I said that already. The second degree of the strategic strategic planning on the small level that I think is important, second degree of formality, is this idea of a mission matrix. And this is a concept I stole from the guy that we used to run the Kennedy Center. And I really love this because it helps adapt your mission into something that's really easy then to see, what should I be working on? What should I be doing next? And how do I communicate, the work that I'm doing? Mission matrix is basically this. You kind of you take your mission statement and you turn it into boxes, like a matrix. Different columns will have different, different things that you're trying to do. If you've got a couple different programs, or if you're trying to, in the human trafficking instance, or if you're trying to work on human trafficking in a certain community, you can define all those in the different regions of the matrix. And then that helps you think about, when you've got an opportunity or when you're putting together a program, to really make sure that it fits somewhere in this matrix. If it doesn't fit in the matrix, it's not something we spend time on. The Kennedy Center example, they're the largest performing arts organization in the country. Every year, the fashion awards tried to book space there, and he would say no, because he pulls out his matrix and he literally has it in his pocket, and he looks and he sees, I don't see fashion on here, so it's not something we do. And when you are trying to be able to educate and build credibility, being specific about what you do and how you do it is really important. So in our example, from the after school mission. If we are working on after school science and literature education for third graders and fourth graders, see, this now gives my little boxes. You could kind of create sub boxes if you wanted to for the, the geographies or, after school versus in school. But if I, in this, had an opportunity to host an event at a high school, you would say, I don't see it on the matrix. I work with third graders and fourth graders. That's my focus. When I'm doing outreach to teachers and principals in Columbus, I'm not working in other parts of Ohio. I'm working in a specific school district. I'm not going to reach out to middle school teachers to get them on board because they don't go in this matrix. So it's sort of just a visual way to keep you on track and to keep you focused. You can always add things to your matrix. If you wanted to do in school, or instead of science and literature, you wanted to do math or music, your matrix can be adaptable, but once you come up with your framework, you want to sort of leave it for a while, because then this is how you explore, my mission is to work here. I'm going to try things to do that. Maybe in 6 months, I'm going to look at and see, again, as that innovation cycle example, what's working? Is this an area I can have an impact in? Is this, achieving the goals that I set out to have? So I think it's really helpful just to stay focused and to keep you on track with the work that you're doing. And I think really creative. Like I said, that, the guy I stole this from actually has it in his pocket, so he can, anytime something comes up, he can reference it. Okay. The last one on the degrees of formality of planning, and this may be something that you've heard of before. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly because, again, there's a lot of information in there already, and this will be in the presentation if you want to go through filling this out. This works for-profit businesses, for startups of all kind. It looks like this. So it has all these different components of your business, and what you do as an exercise is you go through and figure out answers to each of these little boxes. And the goal is for this framework to represent all of the different components of your organization and of the work that you're doing. And the most of the value in this exercise, I think, is the formality of spending time thinking about these different areas. So who are my customers? What customer relationships do I have that are going to make it easier to do this work? What value can I bring, and can my organization bring specifically to do this work? And how is that separate from other folks who are also doing this work? Any of the mission stuff that you have, there is undoubtedly someone else in your town who's doing the same thing or a similar thing. No one's that creative to come up with like a brand new, I guess some people are. I'm certainly not. But how can I have value in this that's unique and can benefit, maybe a different type of the community, or a different type of customer? So there's maybe like 30 slides of this that talk about what each of these things mean. So, in customer segments, customers here, and I like to use the word customer. I like to use for-profit terminology in nonprofits. I think it's helpful in its clarity. I think, a supporter is, what is that? Like, is that someone who's likes your stuff on Facebook, or is that someone who gives you $10,000 every year? I think the for-profit terminology has a little bit more specificity in it. So I like referring to customers. The one thing I do want to point out in the customer section is that all of your work in nonprofits is going to deal with this constant sort of duality around different customer groups. And what I mean by that is, in the human trafficking example, if you're working to help victims of human trafficking, those are your customers, because that's the work and that's the impact that you want to have. The people who give you money to do that work are also your customers. And so you've got, in any of these cases, almost very rare situations, you have the person benefiting from your work is also the person paying for it, which is why for-profits are easier, because that is, you buy a toothbrush, you are the dude who gets to use the toothbrush and you gave money for it. And that's an easy relationship. Nonprofits can be really challenging in the strategy point of view because of this idea that you have customers that are, old retired people who made money in airplane manufacturing, who now give you money that you spend on, education and disadvantaged school districts or something like that. So that's something to keep in mind, that you're always having two customers. You need to have different communications and different strategies for each of those. I could have put a little soapbox thing here. That sounded a little soapboxy. Anyways, I'll just kind of click through this really quickly because because you can download this on your own and sort of see these little examples that I have. How are you providing specific value? How are you going to reach your customers? And again, how are you going to reach both parts of your customer group? How are you going to reach, folks who want to, adopt pets and, benefit from the pet rescue, and also the people who are going to donate money and grants and things to pay for it? How are you going to reach those customers? What relationships do you have already that will help you deliver that value to the customers that you're working on? Because both customer groups are looking for things. The folks you're servicing, are benefiting from your work. The folks who are donating are benefiting as well. They're benefiting in the form of tax deductions and goodwill and getting invited to parties and having you have to be nice to them all the time. They've got benefits too. So what relationships are going to help you deliver those benefits? How are you going to fund the work? Is it going to be people have to pay a fee? Is it going to all come from the state or local foundations? Important to think about. What resources do you have that make it so that you can execute on this work? Key activities. What are the specific things you're going to do as you're delivering this impact? Key partners. Partnerships is a huge thing when you're just getting started. Again, because until you've got some wins, some programmatic wins under your belt, you don't have a ton of credibility in the space, in any spaces you're working in. Partnerships are a great way to sort of enhance your impact. Organizations, especially large organizations, are not going to be able to have the sort of authentic, on the ground impact that you're going to be able to provide as a small organization. And they always want to capitalize on that because the stories are best on the small level. There's a nonprofit I work with in San Diego where I am. There's a woman who hands out tampons to homeless women. And she does it all by herself. She's got a little tiny board. She spends, if you give her $500, she's going to go to CVS. She's going to buy tampons. She's going to walk around. She's going to hand them out. Those stories and that impact per dollar, you can't really get outside of this small space. So partnerships, big organizations always want to take advantage of those stories. And so it's makes it easier to kind of build those relationships. And then kind of this, the other side of revenue is how are you going to spend money? What do you spend money on to do this work? Is it, on therapy, or is it on, infrastructure? So again, the goal for this is to sort of represent at a big picture level everything that goes on in your organization. And again, the value, I think, in going through this exercise is in the formality and in the taking time to sit and think and write down. For me, like when I write something down, it goes to a different part of my brain. And I think a lot of us are like that. So taking time, I highly recommend it. A couple hours on a weekend. It might take you a week to figure this out, but you're definitely going to come through it learning something that you weren't thinking about when you started. Any questions on this? I feel like maybe this could be a whole own presentation, because you could talk about this for a long time. I know I really breezed through it. But the last thing, and I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to talk about this, is that a lot of the goal in creating a strategic plan or in creating a framework for strategic thinking about the organization. I used to work with musicians a lot, and we would do music festivals. And in that world, it's the idea of making it, right? So how do you know if you've made it? How do you even define for yourself what making it is? I think it's really important and helpful. A lot of folks will just say, they want this to be a full-time job for them, which is great. I think that is an absolutely terrific view of success. I think that a million organizations. There are over a million nonprofits in this little tiny nonprofit space in the country. I think a million nonprofits that employ one person or two people is a substantial universal impact and is a lot more achievable than, scaling your organization to have 30 people. But I think it's important for you to really think about what is making it mean for your organization. What would you be happy with? What is reasonable to expect from you, given a lot of folks, this is sort of, I call it the nonprofit side hustle. Everyone else has got a job. I've got other jobs that sort of help with it when I'm doing this work. So given what you know about your situation, what you know about your mission work, what is really possible for you to achieve? And I think that there's a beautiful part of this world where there's space for all these sort of tiny gradients of success. If your goal is to help 20 people, you can make a big difference in 20 people, in the lives of 20 people. And it's a lot easier for you to conceptualize how do you actually do that, right? So if I'm going to help 20 people, that means I have to help one person a month. That means I have to find one and a half people a month, I guess. I don't know how you find a half person, but thinking sort of on the other side about the organization and what's achievable, I think helps on the execution questions a lot. And the other side of this is that, like, what is making it for you, right? As a human, because there's two parts of this. There's your organization and there's you as a person. Is a successful environment for you? Is it a full-time job doing this? Is it something that you get to do on nights and weekends? Is it something you just do once a month, but has a really great impact and really helps you stay connected with a part of the world that you love? I think there's room for all manners of success in this. And I want to say that as sort of encouragement that it's okay if you only help 5 people. I think if everyone can help 5 people, that's a huge thing in the world. So I think that success is not always scaling to be a giant nonprofit. I think there's a little bit of fallacy in that. I think that's more of a for-profit mindset where scale is always required to grow. I think in nonprofits, sustainability at a focused, high impact level, I think is, for me, more satisfying than becoming a big organization that has to move slow and pay pensions and not get to have that sort of super high impact work. I should put soapbox in front of that one. That's my favorite soapbox to talk about. So some other ways that Tiny Opera House can help. Of course, we do webinars and workshops like this. This is a part of an 8-week series. We do every quarter to try to engage with folks who have just gotten their status back or maybe are just starting to really do the work on it. You can go to the website and find out more information. I also do this this program that I call office hours, where you can make a 20-minute appointment with me and kind of talk about whatever you want to talk about, if it's insurance or if it's financial reporting or if it's sort of grant writing, that there's space and that's something that we do for free. The software that we've built that goes as part of this and was a 2-pronged goal when I created this organization was not only doing webinars, because webinars are great. I love getting to talk with folks about how they can do their work, but it's not the same as actually helping them do the work, if that makes sense, right? Because now we talked about strategy, and now y'all have a ton of homework to do, and I get to go on and do something else. So it's the way that we help organizations actually do the work is that we've got a $10 a month software product that helps you do financial reporting, keep track of program financials, keep track of grant reporting. It's a lot easier to use. This is one of the learning curves that I really want to help people get rid of, is this QuickBooks learning curve where you've got to either figure out how to use QuickBooks or pay $50 an hour for a bookkeeper to do this. When you're just getting started, you're not doing anything that is that complicated. And so I built a software product to help keep track of all that information and keeps track of donors. things like that. If you aren't using something, or if you're interested in this, we can set up a time to do a walkthrough, and there's also a demo that you can look at on the website.